Welcome to the Integrate Schools Podcast. I'm Andrew, white dad from Denver.
And I'm Val, a black mom from North Carolina.
And this is What's Up with the Suburbs? Organizing, building relationships, and voting.
That sounds like a really important episode.
Yes, and that's why it is dropping in your feeds in this off week. You may not have been expecting to hear from us, but here we are because we wanted to talk about the suburbs, but also because we are just a few days away from the midterm elections.
That's right. We believe voting is important. So do you have your voting plan, sir?
I already voted. In Colorado, it's lovely. They send us our ballots in the mail. You fill it out, you drop it off in a drop box, or you mail it back, and it all happens before Election Day. If you want to go on Election Day, you can. And so yes, I have already voted. How about you?
Same. I believe in early voting. And the first day of early voting, I was there in person. It took me 5 minutes or less. I left with a voting sticker that said, I voted early.
Nice.
They have upgraded those now.
Man, that's fancy.
And I think it's important that we take every measure we can to create the future that we want.
Yeah, this season we've been focusing on action steps. And certainly one action step would definitely encourage listeners to get out there and vote.
Absolutely.
And so today, voting is really important, but we also wanted to talk about what's going on in the suburbs. One thing that's going on in the suburbs is people are voting, and they're voting in ways that maybe they haven't in the past. And I think part of that is about the popular conception of what the suburbs does not actually match what they currently are.
Yeah. Growing up, I definitely had a fixed idea about the suburbs. I assumed that they were for white and affluent people, people of privilege. We live in the suburbs now. When we start looking for a house here, we would drive around with our realtor who was a black man. And I'm like, are there black people around here? Because one of the values for me was for the kids to grow up in diverse neighborhoods, right? The neighborhoods where they get to interact with a lot of different people. I think they are beautiful, and I think they model the world that we want to create. And so I would ask our realtor, are there any black people here? He's like, yeah, we're everywhere. And I'm like, no way. Like, that's a 2-car garage. And so I'm happy to report that there are lots of black people in my neighborhood. Right. And my favorite neighbor, Mr. John, is also involved in organizing and encouraging people to vote. So I think this is a beautiful example of what is happening in the suburbs, what we'll get into today.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're going to get into it with Dr. Jasmine Clark, who is a microbiologist by training, but ended up sort of being radicalized in the wake of the 2016 election and deciding that she was going to get involved politically, running for state representative from a suburban district in Georgia, and in fact being the first black woman to win a race there, which I think speaks to the kind of changing demographics of the suburbs.
Yeah, congratulations, Dr. Clark. And so on this episode, we get to hear Dr. Clark's story, and I think it inspires to continue to take our own action.
That's right. We originally connected with her through Heather McGee, who suggested we connect with Red Wine and Blue, which is an organization that started in Ohio and sort of spread out across the country now, who's organizing suburban women, as they say, trying to, find a way for everybody to find a voice, everybody to get involved politically. Among many of their programs, one of the things they did was start a podcast called the Suburban Women Problem Podcast. And Dr. Clark is one of the co-hosts of that podcast.
Awesome. It was nice to have another professional on here.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And unless people are in line listening to this episode, we need to go ahead and press play so they can get to voting.
Well, first, I want to say thank you all for inviting me on to the Integrated Schools podcast. I am State Representative Dr. Jasmine Clark, and I represent a House district here in the state of Georgia, House District 108, which is Gwinnett County, the most diverse county in the state of Georgia, and the second largest county in Georgia. I have served in our Georgia State Legislature since 2018, still serving and hoping to continue to serve.
Yeah.
Is it okay if we call you Dr. Jasmine?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I get that question a lot. Like, Dr. Jasmine, Representative Jasmine, or Representative Dr. Jasmine? Like,
Dr. Representative.
Dr. Representative
which
Jasmine.
goes first?
Yeah. It's
okay.
Yeah. I respond to them all. Just, as long as it's respectful.
Yes, ma'am.
You
yes,
got
ma'am.
it.
You were, if I'm not mistaken, you were the first black woman elected to represent that district. Is that right?
Absolutely. Not the first person of color, but definitely the first black woman, which I think is a testament to just how much the quote suburbs are changing and they want to be represented.
Yeah. I want to put a pin in that because we definitely need to come back to that vision of the suburbs. But I definitely want to talk a little bit about Red Wine and Blue. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about Red Wine and Blue, what it is, how it came to be, and why you're a part of it?
So a group of suburban women in Ohio really wanted to find a way to be very involved in elections, first in Ohio, and then, they kind of expanded from there. Basically, women trying to find where they can get engaged. And so Red Wine and Blue did come down to Georgia during the runoff for John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. And that's really when I got involved. Katie Paris, one day out of the blue, she kind of was like, have you ever thought about podcasting? And I was like, yeah, no, not really. But I guess it's something I could do.
Welcome.
And here I am a year and a half later, and I have been a podcast host on the Suburban Women Problem. Red Wine and Blue itself has just been amazing at taking everyday people who maybe didn't think they could get involved and giving them the formula for how they can get involved. Everyone's not going to be the person that's going to be the public speaker. Everyone's not going to be the person that's going to, run for office. But whatever you can do, they really help to link you with other people, like-minded people, and really give people the formula to get involved in whatever capacity they can. And so, like right now, for the midterms, they have the great troublemaker turnouts. And let's be honest, that's what we're doing. We're making some trouble. This is an opportunity for small groups of people to get together. Sometimes people who live in a red bubble feel like there is no one else that they can engage with. Mm-hmm. They get those people together and they say, hey, this is how you can fight back against book bans. This is how you can stand up for trans kids who are being bullied by our government. This is how you can fight for reproductive rights. This is how you can fight for voting rights. They help people come together and figure out just exactly how to do that. And I love it because you get people who have literally never engaged in politics at all now coming in and saying, oh, I didn't think that I could do this. And now that I can, I'm not stopping. And I'm going to do this now. And I'm going to do this.
Right.
And so we're not just building relationships for an election, we're building relationships for issues. And I think that's what's important because those issues don't go away after Election Day.
Yeah.
Right. Why do you care? How did you come to find yourself, engaged and involved? You're a microbiologist by training. Why politics? Why activism? What brought you to that?
So I'm going to be really honest about this. In November of 2016, my worst nightmare came to fruition. On the second Tuesday of November, I went to sleep a scientist, and the next morning I woke up a mad scientist. And it was at that point that I said, oh no, I have got to do something. So that actually led me more into activism, where I led the Atlanta March for Science. We had 10,000 people show up just to say, we need to actually consider science when we're making policy in our state and in our country. And then from there, I joined the Georgia Alliance for Social Justice. From there, I sat down with my family and some of my friends, and I said, guys, I think I might run for office. And I ran in an election that I was not projected to win, but I did win. I flipped a seat. That's how I really ended up feeling like I needed to be involved. It started in 2016. But since 2016, there's been so much that has happened that I'm so glad I'm in the seat that I'm in. And there's so much work that needs to be done.
Dr. Jasmine, I'm having goosebumps listening to your story. And I need the listeners to know, I have this big grin on my face because it's just so amazing, your story and how that came to be. And, Andrew and I have talked previously about connecting to issues that connect us to other people. And so I think your story is a great example of that, right? Like you had something that you're really passionate about and you're like, how do I get involved?
Yep.
And who can I get involved with?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great journey from scientist to mad scientist. I love it. So you did win. You were not projected to win. You represent a suburban area in Georgia. And my guess is that you were not projected to win because of the vision that we have of the suburbs and the idea of a Black woman being elected in the suburbs as we sort of popular culture conceives of them feels like hard to imagine, but that's not actually the way the suburbs are anymore. And when you can talk a little bit about, kind of the changes in your district, but then also kind of broadly and, the kind of mismatch between what we think of as the suburbs and what the suburbs actually are.
Absolutely. Even I have fallen into the trap of believing that the suburbs represents the white nuclear family with the white picket fence and the soccer mom filling up her van with little white children and driving them to the soccer field on Saturdays and then going to church on Sunday. That is what we see in media. And that's really what a lot of people think of when they think of the suburbs. However, I live in the suburbs and I realize my neighbor to my right, she is from India and she makes amazing tea. I have neighbors on the other side that are from Spanish-speaking countries, and their ability to kind of switch back and forth between English and Spanish is something that I envy. I love it, and I wish that I could do it. I have neighbors from literally all over the world right here in my neighborhood. In our county, we have over 100 different languages and dialects represented.
Wow.
And our county is very suburban. We have different faiths. Some people are going to church on Sunday. Some people are going to synagogue. Some people are going to the mosque. Some people are going to the Hindu temple. There are people who look just like me, nice and chocolate brown, and all the way, across the color spectrum. I had a conversation with someone that talked about how saying something is a melting pot is probably not actually a good way of thinking about it, because a melting pot, the goal is for everyone to all blend together and be one. I like to think of Gwinnett County and the suburbs of Georgia as more of a mosaic, where it's beautiful in all of its individual colors and the way everything fits together. We don't have to be monolithic. We don't all have to mesh together or melt together. We live together in a beautiful mosaic. And that's the true suburbs for me.
Dr. Jasmine, do you have any hypotheses about why that narrative of the white soccer mom suburb persists?
I think it persists because the representation does not always look like what the suburbs looks like. So just for example, despite what my area, Lilburn, looks like in real life, our city council just elected the first Black and Korean mixed person to the city council. Gwinnett County is just over 200 years old, and we're just now starting to see people of color in positions of power.
Wow. That says a lot.
It does. I mean, it really does. For a long time, our school board was the same way. They did not look like the beautifully diverse school system that we have here at all. If you just look at our student body, you would see how beautifully diverse we are. Yet our leadership, the front-facing people, the people with the platforms, did not look like what the suburbs actually looked like. And it's been very difficult to change that.
I have a theory about this question as well. I wonder what you think of it, Dr. Jasmine. There's a way in which the kind of vision of suburban life as being mostly white, like, creates a permission structure, I think, for white folks to search out whiteness, to white folks who want to live in all white spaces or mostly white spaces, where what you can say that what you're looking for is the suburban American dream life, but what you're looking for is actually whiteness. Like, what I actually want is to raise my family surrounded by white people. I feel like I can't say that, but I can say I want the suburbs.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Let's be honest, what the suburbs were historically was that. It was white families wanting to move away from having to live amongst non-white families. And it was that flight out of those spaces into their own communities. It's kind of like the suburbs were theirs. And actually any movement into the suburbs by non-white people was more of an infiltration into their areas. And we see this as the suburbs do change. There are a lot of people who say things like, we got to take our communities back. Basically, what I interpret your theory as is the suburbs was supposed to be code for white. And then we kind of messed up the code because everyone was like, look, I want to live in an affordable house. I like
That's
yards.
it.
I like trees. Like
That's
I want,
it, Dr. Jasmine.
like, that's not reserved for just white people. Like other people want those things too.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And I don't think that your suburb is a fluke, right? I mean, I think
not
this
at
is what
all.
we see in suburbs across the country, that this is really what's happening. It's that contradiction between this vision that white people have been sold of the suburbs meaning white, and then there being more and more people of color in suburbs that is leading to this tension that I think has been really capitalized on in a sort of scarily effective way by the right wing in the push to ban books, the fear mongering around CRT and all these things. Can you talk a little bit about how that's playing out in your district and what you see as kind of the role to push back on that?
So I think the pandemic did a lot, but one of the things the pandemic did was just gave people way too much time on their hands. And so then you got these people who were just mad about everything. It was the perfect opportunity for people who were upset that their suburbs were not living up to their vision of the suburbs to try to, in my opinion, grasp some power back. And the way they did that was by showing up to school board meetings and first just being mad that the school board changed in general. Like the school board is changing. It doesn't look like what it looked like. So that must mean our schools are going to be horrible now. And that's literally what people are saying. And they didn't say, oh, because now that the school board is majority Black, that our schools are going to be bad. They would say things like, oh, now that the school board has changed, we're going to look more like those other school districts. And then they would describe majority Black school districts that in their mind somehow are worse than ours, even though some of these school districts are literally award-winning school districts. I think our society has always had a tendency to associate anything that has more white people as somehow better. So you have these people and they showed up to school board meetings and they're like, first they're like, open the schools. And so they're like, all right, fine, we'll open the schools, but people need to wear a mask. And then they were like, no, open the schools and don't make people wear masks. And they're like, well, teachers are dying. School bus drivers are dying. There are vulnerable children in the school that really need to be protected. So that's why we have masks. And so this whole thing about masks, and people just started going crazy. It was like a psychosis. So then once they said, okay, masks are now strongly recommended, but not required. And it was like, well, now what are we going to be mad at? So it was like, all right, books. And so they took talking points from extremist groups and they would show up to the meetings. And now all of a sudden it was all about all these books and social emotional learning. I mean, we literally had people coming up and saying that diversity and inclusion was bad. Like, why are y'all trying to include people? I was like, do you hear yourself? And then, oh my God, CRT. And they just swore up and down like everyone was being CRT'd in schools. And I'm just like, I got so tired of hearing CRT because it was like you were fighting against a ghost that wasn't there. But, we have all these different issues. And I really just think it's a way for people who are seeing themselves losing the messaging battle because they are, because their messages are bad. Just falling back on, well, if we can't win the messaging battle, we're just going to scare people to death by telling them that there's all these imminent threats and it's all the non-white people's fault because they came here and with them, they brought all these threatening things with them.
You talked about power and fear, and I'm wondering what you have learned about those particular things that might be helpful for an audience.
So I think it's really important that we recognize that emotions are very powerful and fear is a very powerful emotion. And so if you can make someone afraid of something, they will not necessarily lean on the most rational solutions to that fear. And so I think one of the things we can't do is just tell people that they need to get over it. That's not going to help because if I truly believe that there is something that is about to harm me, if I truly believe that I am in some type of danger, if I truly am fearful of something, then you're not going to convince me to be rational by telling me that I am irrational. It's just not how it works.
No one's ever calmed down because you told them to calm down.
Told them to calm down. Oh gosh. Right. The time that once somebody told me to calm down, it did not end well. So I think to answer your question, we acknowledge what people don't understand and try to get them to a place of understanding. And I think some of the best ways we do that is through question asking. And so, for example, if someone is like, well, I'm very concerned about CRT, I think the first question is, well, what is your concern? Like, what specifically are you concerned about? And usually they don't actually know. And so then that's an opportunity to say, well, this is what CRT is. And also saying, by trying to take away what's not being taught, let me tell you what is being taken away. Now your kid is not getting to learn about Ruby Bridges. And you learned about Ruby Bridges and you're fine. Or now your kid is not learning about Martin Luther King. So I think it's question asking and just kind of getting to the root of people's fears. And I'm not a therapist. I don't even play a therapist on TV. And so I don't really know all the tactics. But what I do know is a Facebook ad is not as effective as a true conversation. And when you actually talk to people and just talk about it, first of all, most of the people who are really mean on Facebook and Twitter in real life, they're not like that. But also, once you actually have a real conversation with someone, especially someone you know, like, hey, I literally shop at the same Publix as you. We run into each other in the aisles all the time. Our kids play on the same basketball team. So I'm talking to you as a regular person today. And let's talk about this. And when you have those real, just authentic conversations, it's a lot easier to get your message across. We like to call that like relational organizing. And I think that's so important.
You mentioned the power of organizing, relational organizing, of finding ways to be in community and in conversation with folks. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the power of cross-racial movement building, of bringing multiple people and different perspectives together to fight for justice?
I think it's really important, actually. I think one of the first conversations I had with my co-host on the suburban women problem, it was actually about voting rights. And both of my co-hosts are white women. They had never stood in line to vote. They did not have that context at all. It's not that they didn't understand. Like, they get it, but it was never their experience. So the actual experience of standing in line to vote is so normal to me. I stood in line with my parents. I stood in line with my grandma when she would go vote. I stood in line every time I've had to vote. It was so normal to me that I thought everybody stood in line.
Same.
Having a conversation with someone who was like, what do you mean lines? Like, you just go in, you go to the machine and you vote. Like, who stands in line? And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Why do you need water?
Everybody
Why do you need
stands
snacks?
in line. Yeah.
Right.
And so you have to have those conversations to get the perspectives as well as the experiences of other people to understand why they're fighting so hard for the things that they're fighting for. Like I said, my suburbs, we're a mosaic. And so that means that we all have different life experiences that we bring to the table. And if we're not talking to each other, they might not understand why I'm so passionate about the fact that we should allow line warming and we should allow people to bring snacks and water, because sometimes you're standing in line for 2 hours.
Right.
But if they never experienced that, it's not that they don't agree with me, but they can't really go to bat for me in the way that they might be able to if they've actually had a conversation with me and they now understand why I'm so passionate about something that to them seems so simple. Can't people bring their own snacks? I'm like, hey, have you ever had to try to get home from work in Atlanta traffic after 5 o'clock? The polls close at 7, and you got to pick up your kids from daycare in between that. But that's never been their experience. You have to have a lot of perspectives at the table. I believe that about organizing. I believe that about representation as well. You have a better representative government when you have multiple perspectives at the table. And that's what's been lacking. That is what is changing in our country. And that's what a lot of people are scared of. Because when you get those other voices at the table, all of a sudden they're going to want to start doing things for other people that normally we actually made it okay to marginalize and ignore and disregard.
I think your example that you just gave us is so powerful and something that I can connect to personally. I had my own experience where I'm tweeting about waiting in line and white folks around the country are like, what are you talking about, Val? And I'm like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
What do you mean
Yeah,
you don't
exactly.
have a line? What do you mean?
When they told me they never stood in line, I was like, I literally associate voting with standing in line.
Absolutely.
Like it is a part of the voting experience for me.
Absolutely.
And to find out that there are people who've never stood in, I was in shock. Like I was in shock that they had never stood in line.
In shock.
Just as much as they were in shock that standing in line was literally a part of my voting experience. I always count on a line. Like I'd never thought that there was a way that you could vote and not stand in lines.
Yep.
Gotta move to Colorado. We do all mail-in ballots.
I know.
I was going to ask you, do you think the Black folks in Colorado feel the same way about their voting experience?
Yes. I mean, that's my impression from talking to there's plenty of other things to worry about and be concerned about here. The ability to vote, it's so easy. The ballot comes in the mail to your house.
I actually love
all
that.
you have to do is drop it off.
What's your voting percentage?
We have one of the highest in the country.
Nice.
Because it is so easy. And you can go vote on the day of the election. You can show up, but so many people then have already sent in their ballots that you don't end up with
There's no lines.
Big, huge, long lines. And
we actually saw that in Georgia. During the pandemic, we sent everyone a absentee ballot application, and the participation increased because more people had their ballot mailed to them. Not only did the participation increase, but on election day, so many people had already cast their ballot that there were no lines. Right. I think that giving people more options to vote is probably the best thing that you can do for elections.
So what message do you have for those folks who are either disenchanted or disenfranchised about how they can remain civically involved?
So I think that when you are disenchanted, it's very easy to get disenchanted when it comes to the voting process, and especially when you are disenfranchised, to lean in instead of fall back. I think our tendency is to fall back and just say, look, I tried and they wouldn't let me. Mm-hmm. I would encourage people to lean in. But I think that leaning in also is a lot easier when you got other people leaning in with you. Mm-hmm. And so find those people who are leaning in and join them. And I think there are a number of ways to do that. As we talked about earlier, Red, Wine, and Blue has great troublemaker trainings. And I think that is one way to help each individual person find their strength to lean in and then find their people around them to lean in with them. So the great troublemaker trainings are great because you don't have to already be a motivational speaker. You don't have to have a degree in political science. You don't have to know, the intricacies of the war in the Middle East. You just got to care about your community, care about your neighbors, and want to move things in the right direction. Mm-hmm. That's all you have. And then if you have that baseline, you care and you want to make a change in some way, then you're in there. But then outside of great troublemaker trainings, voting is the minimum. Try to get out of your comfort zone and try to do more. And that's not easy for everyone. Like I said, everybody doesn't have the kind of job where you can just do all this extracurricular stuff at the end of the day. And sometimes after you get off work, you're tired. I am tired a lot of days. So I get it 100%. But whatever you do, just recognize that the feeling that you're feeling is the way that they want you to feel. And they are the people who are feeling their power slip away and they're trying to claw it back. The power to vote is so powerful, and the ability to affect change through the electoral process is so powerful that there are people that are trying to take it from you. Snatch it back. Like, don't let them take it. If it wasn't powerful, they would not care. I promise you. But the fact that every time we make a gain, they try to find a way to reverse that gain, that lets you know just how powerful your vote is. So don't ever convince yourself that it's not.
Thank you.
That's beautiful. That is an inspiring message. election right around the corner. Everybody needs to make sure their voice is heard. But I think also the idea of finding your people and building those relationships in the community, because I think, like you said, it's not just about one election, that after the midterms are over,
Absolutely.
no matter what the results are, there will still be challenges. There will still be work to be done. And that work is best done in community with like-minded people who are ready to put their shoulders down and fight for something better. That the only experience you need, the only expertise you need to bring is an expertise in your own life and your own things that you care about.
Man, get people elected first, but after you get them elected, hold their butts accountable. Like getting them elected is just step one. Now that they're in office, make sure they're listening to you. And if they're not listening to you, talk to them some more. Make them listen to you. It's a process. It doesn't stop on election day. Doesn't stop after the votes are certified. It goes on and on. It matters. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't try so hard to take it away from you.
Yeah.
One final question. Not sure if you have any young people that you love and care about who are doing school.
Mm-hmm.
Love to hear any of your thoughts on their schooling experience.
So I have a daughter who just turned 14. She is in 8th grade and middle school. And I also have a son. He is 16 and 11th grade. He actually goes to school in Prince George County in Maryland.
Okay.
He lives with his dad. So I have 2 amazing little people that I brought into this world and that I am just trying to make sure become productive citizens in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is their school experience. And so I pay attention and I watch and I listen. And I just want to know what they're going through, what they're learning about, but also like how they're interacting with their peers and all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a few things that I know. Number one, when it comes to teaching history, my son loves history. Kids want to know and they're curious. If you ban a book, that's going to make them want to know even more. I mean, I can tell you that as a mom of teenagers. Ban that book and they are finding that book and they are reading it and they are sharing it with their friends. I love it because now kids are reading, but they're like, what's in it? What's in it? Number 2, we really need to have a reckoning about guns in our country because active shooter drills suck. They suck for those students. They're scary. And I mean, I remember having tornado drills and fire drills in school, but we also take precautions to not start fires. We need to take more precautions to not have guns coming into our schools in the first place. And then the third thing I would say, when it comes to the treatment of trans children and LGBTQ children in general, the kids do not care the way that the adults do. The adults are like all up in arms of, they're teaching that some people have 2 dads. And the kids are like, yeah, guess what? Some people have 2 dads. Guess what? Sometimes John wears jeans and sometimes John wears a dress. Guess what? John is John. And no one actually cares what the heck John is wearing because John is just John. And that's what John does. Right. The things that I feel like the adults that are standing up at these school board meetings are complaining about, I'm like, heck, do you even talk to your kid? Because I talk to my kid all the time and they don't care about this thing the way that you care about this thing. And I really feel like you're projecting your own thoughts onto your children.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the kids are going to be all right. I won't say the kids will save us because I don't feel like we should put that burden on them. We should be protecting them. But I will say that the kids are going to be all right and that a lot of the bigotry and the negativity that a lot of the adults are exuding, the kids are like, whatever, mom, whatever, mom, whatever, dad.
That's adult baggage, not kid baggage, for sure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jasmine.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the work you're doing out there. And I would look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
So Val, what did you think?
Oh man, a couple of things really stood out to me. I want to start with her identity just as a woman, a doctor, a mother, and then all of that informing how she decided to get involved in the work, right? And so she didn't necessarily see this path that she's currently on. What she saw was an opportunity to be an advocate and passionate about her subject area, science, right? And so that, like, connecting to whatever you're passionate about and getting involved that way, I think sparks a desire to continue to connect, to continue to advocate for the things that you really care about. And I think that allows all of us to see ourselves in this, right? Because I personally don't see myself as a politician, but I see myself as a fierce advocate of what I really believe in, and knowing that it's important to get behind people who do see themselves as politicians to support the work that they are doing to create this future that we believe in together. So yeah, her identity for sure is one of the things that stood out to me.
Yeah, she talked about like the only thing you need to get involved is you got to care about your community, you got to care about your neighbors, and you got to want to move things in the right direction. And that feels like a pretty easy hurdle to cross, right? Like I think pretty much everybody feels some connection to those things. And I think one of the things I appreciate about Red Wine and Blue is if you fall into that boat, I'm not a politician, I don't think that I'm ready to run for mayor. Here's this thing you can do, which is if you care, we're going to connect you to other people who care and teach you how to, try to advance causes that you care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can't separate that idea from the idea that she also talked about in terms of the mosaic, right? So you will come together, thankfully, with people across difference where you're not trying to all be the same person, but you're working from your different positions and identities together for this issue that you all are passionate about. We've talked a lot about how important this cross-racial work is for the future that we want, right? There's lots of work for each community to do, and there's lots of work that we need to do together. And I think what I love about Dr. Clark's vision is that we can bring our whole selves to this cause,
right?
And that's welcomed.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And that has me thinking of the link. And, I think this episode was not sort of as directly tied to education as most of our content is, but still felt really important to get out now before the midterms. But also, the link in my mind is that idea of the mosaic, that everybody gets to hold on to their own humanity, that everybody gets to be themselves and show up in that way, and that's actually what makes things beautiful. In my mind, that is like that's a vision for a great school, that's a vision for a great education system. And the organizing and activating and finding your place with your voice where the only expertise you need is a desire for things to be better and a love for your neighbors, that feels like a really important part for parents and caregivers to tap into when it comes to, what does it mean to try to advance equity in our schools?
I was imagining a school where students are able to learn these things, right? Where else, except an integrated school, can you learn how to live in a multiracial democracy where you're all working towards something that you're passionate about? You're all trying to learn something, right? Like, where else can we do that? It sounds like a dream in its most beautiful sense. Knowing that is the future I want as an adult, it only makes sense for me to really want to put my children in a place where that is possible for them to learn how to do that.
Right.
Because too often when white and privileged folks are choosing racially isolated schools, they don't recognize that too is a sacrifice, right?
Right.
So my kid goes all the way through K-12, maybe through college, not having the ability to engage across difference with someone about something as important as our democracy.
Right.
Right? Like,
that's a sacrifice.
That's a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, it makes me warm and cuddly. Like, literally, like, that's the face I was making, audience. I was like, it's just like a hug to be in this dream that we have for the world, starting in our schools.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, like tying back to last episode with Dr. Brittany Murray, that schools and particularly PTAs are kind of like the first exposure that kids often have to civic life, to civic associations and this kind of like mini democracy playing out. And so, I think the vision that is making you feel warm and cuddly is something that I share. And, the recognition that just the creation of those spaces isn't enough, but the relationship building and the organizational piece that Dr. Clark also talks about feels so relevant to the schools, because we know we can't just sort of throw a bunch of different kids together in the building and hope that these things come about by themselves, that they're really, we require some intentionality, we require leaning in, like Dr. Clark talks about, leaning in, and it's easier to lean in when you have other like-minded people. And so the idea of kind of finding those like-minded people in your school community, in your city community, in your neighborhoods, and then leaning in on the idea of building these spaces that we want as models. It's like little mini multiracial democracies that can exist in schools. They don't necessarily exist, but they certainly, as look around our lives, where is the place that they are most likely to happen? And I think that's, to me, the power of schools.
Right. As you were talking, I was thinking, as a listener, as a caregiver, what is something that I could do, right? Say my district was what it was in terms of leadership electorally, and I still wanted to do something. I think what politicians who value public education need are parents who are informed about the benefits of it and willing to speak up in instances to fight for it. And so we've seen lots of examples of parent involvement in the past year around book bans, anti-CRT or anti-social emotional learning. I don't get it. So we've seen lots of that happening. And it's as important for us not to sit aside and not thank school districts for the things that they're doing that we love. Like, thank you for having those books on the shelf. Thank you for teaching this aspect of world history. Thank you for allowing time for the kids to get to know each other, in their SEL time, right? I think all of that also goes a long way. And as a caregiver, I can do that and still feel like I'm contributing, right? There's always something that we can do.
Yes. Well, you've sort of jumped ahead here, Val. We're into the action steps part of the episode already.
Yeah.
Those definitely count. The other thing, certainly a clearer action step coming out of this is vote.
Yeah.
If you have not voted yet, make a plan. Bring your friends. Make sure that your friends are voting. In many places, public education is on the ballot. So we've got to show up. We've got to organize. We've got to advocate for our kids in our schools. And the first step, the bare minimum step, is to vote and make sure that those votes reflect those values.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, I am one who has many times volunteered to canvass and call and knock on doors. And I don't know if you've done it recently, but I feel like people don't pick up their phones much anymore. Right?
Yeah. Text messages, maybe. But,
that's right. Me included. And so, I'm encouraging folks to even use their social media platforms. Like, just let somebody know that you're voting, that you find this issue important. So even if they're not picking up the phone, they're scrolling through their social media feed and they're paying attention.
So yeah, get out, vote. Go to redwine.blue if you want to connect. The great troublemaker trainings are going on now. There's lots of ways to get involved before the midterms, which are just a few days away. And, not just voting, but look to find those like-minded people, build the relationships. As Dr. Clark says, it's not just building relationships for an election, but building relationships for issues. And certainly the issue of education has been a very hot topic lately. And so finding those like-minded people, building those relationships with them to advocate for public education that serves all kids and serves them all well is something that, will never be wasted energy.
And, if you get to this episode after you voted, know that there's things that you can do all year to stay involved, not only with your local community, your school district, but also with this podcast. So if you have things that you would like to say to us, we would love to hear from you.
Yes. Hit that Voice Memos app on your phone, record us a voice memo, and email it off to podcast@integratedschools.org. We'll play some of your clips on upcoming episodes.
That's right. And share this episode, read it, study it with your friends. We need you to grow and continue to spread the message.
That's right. And if you haven't tapped out all of your giving by donating to candidates who support public education and are going to be allies for justice, and you have a few dollars left over, we'd be grateful for your support. Patreon.com/integratedschools.
Thank you so much.
Well, Val, it was a pleasure to be in this with you as I try to know better and do better.
Until next time.